just about a half an hour outside of Nafplio. There you can see some kind of fortress-like facility up there, but not important enough to be noted apparently. And the hills here are pretty much covered with olive trees and orange trees. Little streams flowing down through the hills. Pretty countryside. There's little communities like this, and as the bus rolls along through this rural section, we drop off usually older folks, not younger folks. They've probably already migrated to Athens or elsewhere if they could. Pretty little Byzantine church. Some abandoned. Although ironically, people moving back out of Athens to the countryside where their homes are already owned and it's free and they can raise their food. If you look closely, you can see how some of the olive trees have been cut off as old trees to allow the new sprouting branches to grow. It seems like a greater distance between trees there. These are probably just to accommodate a small community or an operation, but there's another solar setup there. So this is the theater of Epidauros, built better than 2,000 years ago and still used today for theatrical performances and other performances. Immediately in front of us were the rooms and the backdrop, if you will, of the stage, with the rooms that supported the theater productions. The stage would, of course, been in that round section there. And here we can see how they sloped these stones to create the railing, now quite weathered. And even here on the seats, you can see that classic groove system. Intermediate level, people would have entered past this wall. This has the appearance of being restored. And here are just the remains of the important people's seats, which there would have been at least a couple that were elaborately carved, wouldn't you think? This is the way all the ends were. Don't really know. At the top, and don't know what this area back in here would have been for. Probably some kind of an entranceway for those who came in from the top. Perhaps even shops and so forth like you'd find in a regular stadium today, or theater, for bathrooms and other kinds of things. And from up here we can see over there to the far side that there are back walls, so we'll look at those more closely. The acoustics must have been phenomenal, not to mention the stentorian voices of the actors, to be able to hear it from up here. This older man is testing that theory out by yelling apparently to some compatriots elsewhere in the theater. He's German. My guess is that the productions that the Greeks played here, performed here, were ones that were well known to each Greek. So like opera today, you may not understand the language, but you know the story as it progresses along. So I'm in the middle of the theater, and I think it's important to look at the backdrop. It's used for not only reproduction of ancient Greek plays, but regular theater and opera and other musical presentations. It'd be interesting to listen to a YouTube video of an opera sung here. You can hear that lady talking down in the center. Apparently, at least the Lonely Planet says, dropping a coin where she is on a stone, I assume, can be heard up where I am. This once could hold 14,000 people. Isn't that amazing? Interesting here how time has taken its toll. Here the different rows are alternately indented for some reason. And here is the view from the uppermost left seat. I'd love to hear a YouTube clip where there's applause just to see if you can get a sense of the uproarious noise and sound from that applause of 14,000 people. It's here that this is finished off round, so that which we saw on the other side was apparently just this lower part here. Here's the original, more elegant pieces. You can see the remains of the outer wall, and perhaps this is a chunk, so that this might have been some kind of a pathway through here. Maybe there was something here. It kind of looks like it might have been original. It's got a slight curve to it. Whereas those blocks there just look like someone cannibalized part of the place. Now I wonder what that is over there. There's supposed to be a smaller theater. Perhaps that's it. It certainly is something. I'm going to hike over there and look at that. Like an alternate pathway. That there were several routes up to the top. This just being another sloped, ramped pathway. The whistle indicates the guard telling somebody to stop doing something they shouldn't be doing. I would imagine that this line caused by these two gateways or walkways was completed here in the form of a complete rectangle, except over there where it said angle and tied into that one, so that this was a complete structure in here, would be my guess. So we've done about all that we can do here. We'll go to the other place now. This is a photo of the area I'm going to try and get into now. I'm thinking it's just this one they refer to as the smaller theater, but you can see that the ruins are much more extensive than that. I think it's this part over here. Now I need to find out how to get in there. Back in ancient times, more so than the theater, this Epidauros was known as a center of medicine and healing. And the gods, whatever their name was of that, were worshipped here. This is a picture of what's before us. So here would have stood large buildings, or stoa, as marketplaces we saw in ancient Agora in Athens. Probably these would have been shops all along here. You can see from that inner line of stones there that this was probably a raised area, and that, or at least that was a lowered area in the center there, a courtyard, if you will. Imagine if you stood in Times Square and all that was there was about 1.5 feet of the foundation and the outer walls of buildings that we know are there now. And you were able to subtract out from the picture you see now the buses, the people, the cars, the noise, the rest of the buildings. And off to the side might be a remnant of the clock in Times Square that only you and I of today would recognize as such. Because just a scrap of it might be there, like these pieces. This is the Greek bath. They were originally here or not, but perhaps the trough that brought water in. You can see a narrower little trough there that channeled it into this room here. Over there, a little square room. I wanted to let that herd get beyond me. I don't see any way of knowing from looking at what I see the strategy or the infrastructure for these baths as opposed to the Roman baths, which carried hot steam, if you will, underground or underneath the floors through a phalanx of pillars that supported the floor. This artifact is interesting because it looks like a double wash basin. What's interesting is it's so small. Baths are usually large rooms. Here another kind of wash basin or something, and then notice that over there. I wonder what that says, if anything. Perhaps nothing, because there's one with a smaller indentation near it, so these may have been, who knows, possible down in there. Steam was carried. That's how this stone here has been worked. Seems very recent, doesn't it? I'm guessing that these are all brand new, but interesting if they reflect what the rest looked like, because what we see from the older stones next to them. But yes, you can detect that same kind of grooving, like here and here and here. Whatever this was, it's pretty impressive sized rooms. Wonder if those are, in that far rectangular, if those are center pillar bases or column bases. You can see that this was all built up. Perhaps this is where that theater was. Just standing in a mob talking to each other. You wonder what the point of it is. Looks like some columns. Yes, still embedded in a wall. We can see more over there. Of course, there's one. Maybe that was all restored. There's some center column bases. Huh. Interesting. So it looks like those columns would have wrapped around the stage area, if you will, if that's theater. Huh. You can tell from those blocks on that the lower right panel of that construction that those are brand new, everything, and a lot of the ones in there are, but at least it gives us an idea of what it would have looked like. This would have been one end of this temple. You can see the pediment starting to rise up. This is the stadium in this complex. Of course, it has the same illusion of the big stadium in Athens. It's built between, in a notch, if you will, between two little ridges, unless this was all excavated out. And down here remain apparently pillars that defined the starting gates or positions for each runner. And probably when we go down there, we can see maybe those are the starting blocks also. Our orientation here is this is the first big theater we went visited. This is the first alto or atlos or whatever it was that we saw when we came in. The stoa, excuse me. That's the stoa that we saw when we entered. And there's our stadium, and we're here. So you can see how the part we just looked at is the stadium, and it was wrapped by a set of columns right around here. And this apparently is where those reconstructed a couple of columns are. Here's what that small theater looks like if you're standing at the top of the seats here, looking down to where these columns were that we saw from over here a little ways. This is interesting because it has a ramp going into the temple. I don't know if that was original or not, but first time I've seen that, I think it's a good idea. Yes, is that just like the Roman agora, this might have started off as a simple complex and grew as more and more centuries of rulers wanted to put in place their identity. Here we're behind that area where the theater is. Theater's from and to the right of that mound. Here we're looking at another building. And first off, we can see that this wall also had stone that was worked. Kind of reminds me of what I think I saw at an Anasazi site at, I think it's Mesa Verde. I've entered into this complex. Inside here, see these columns? They would have been inner columns, 3 of them going down there. Another one here, they were probably matched. And that would have given support to the interior of the structure we're in now. Are these benches original? How fascinating. Huh. Just imagine the thousands over time, particularly in that time, that sat here, which I'll do until the whistle blows. Isn't that amazing? That my weight sits on the very stones, compresses the very molecules that thousands of others 2,000 years ago compressed. Well, at least most of the columns, or some of the columns, components are still here for rebuilding if they wish to do it at some time. And Doric, looks simple. Ionic. These holes here that would have been for posts that walk along a side to the left of that building. We're walking along a little drainage ditch, probably designed to keep water away from that building complex, or at least to take it away. Structure here, a fairly large structure. Again, a building quite large. Probably a temple. We can see the remnants of some. I was going to say columns, but I guess those aren't columns. Narrow building next to that one we were just in with fluted columns, which are prettier, or at least more detailed than those others, although they're smaller. And here another smaller building. I feel so ignorant saying the obvious. Although these are interesting because we're getting a sense of this extra work. Was this some kind of railing? The neighborhood that we go into. Buildings stretch off along a common road, which I think I'm now walking on. Buildings to our right and to our left. Architects reconstruct all this, and why? Can do in my ignorance is look for novelty, and over here, at least the fact that it's covered suggests something novel. Drainage ditch. Notice those are pretty substantial stones for that function. The buildings still extant. Guess is that this would be some kind of a bath, but I could be wrong. Notice that there is a fairly thick layer of plaster on those walls. And those capstones lap out over that wall face. Little basin, you can see where water came in through there and maybe through there, and that was a waterway along there. So maybe this was a hot or a cold bath. Notice that area down there seems lower. Was there perhaps a seat there? You know, I'm just taking flying guess at all this, but that's not being an archaeologist. That's all we can do. But why that ledge in there? Was this for some reason covered over? A square hole. And here, well, that looks like just a place that water would run out through. See, from that wall right along there, perhaps down into here and out through there. Nicely carved stone. Where was that positioned? Is that a chunk of metal? Yes, it is, designed to hold something in place on it. What's interesting about this building is the great use of brick, and either also walls of stone and brick. Design I've seen with the Anasazi and with the Inca, where you take those small brick or stones and make one layer and then larger layers in between it. Has perhaps had the same structural significance as you'll see today on old buildings in this country, where wood is used, let's say, every 4 feet in height to provide perhaps some kind of lateral stability. It's used a lot of brick. Could this be Roman? The drain comes out underneath that wall. runs along here on a walkway of stone, maybe in the original. But what was this little basin for? Was that where people could dump stuff without it splashing more than it might have inside the trough? Isn't that interesting? First time I've ever seen that. It would have been the first step up into this building, which may be like another stoa. You can see that it had a line of columns here, and then a wall inside. Maybe. All along here, at the same interval, are these larger little baths, if you will. How fascinating. Could it have been to accommodate the runoff from specific buildings from overhead? First time I've seen that. So here we can see a little bit of detail in the stonework on this. I assume it's a base. But yet here are the remains of a column base, but a little bit more interesting column base. More work at the base. Going down to see this just because it's here. But notice there are columns remains as I walk towards this structure. Ramp would seem to suggest that we're certainly looking at a temple. The big blocks of stones that form the floor. And here we can see some of the nicely worked corners and little indentations where things were held together, perhaps with chunks of metal. The remains of one of those basins. Was it for baptism, for sacrifice? Well, more bowls, certainly. Just a storage, perhaps, of some of the column chunks as a prelude to, at that time, a restoration of this, or at least an understanding of it. Look at how heavily weathered that stone is. It almost looks like it's natural stone rather than blocks that have been weathered. Because it's a limestone, so it probably weathers relatively easy, although some of the others have not. Maybe they're not limestone, it's something stronger than that. Look at how heavily this column has been weathered. Can you imagine the sense of futility, perhaps, of the artist who carved this if he could see it now? Seriously, could this be original? An original well? Is it possible? Just to orient, I'm going to loop around here to the right. We've been here, up there where a lot of the brick was, and then behind me where we've just walked from this old little temple, and that couple from Grand Junction, Colorado that I chatted with. So we'll walk around this way and come back to the stadium and maybe get down into it. Big snake, I wonder what kind it is. Structures, almost medieval, I would guess, in the way of a monastery or something, made principally from the brick to give corners and maybe arches, but the stone to fill it all in. You can be sure that if it is that much a later construction, that somewhere within it are cannibalized chunks of that stone. This may have been the workshop for archaeologists when there was money to spend. Here, this large building, apparently in some reasonably recent state of restoration or rebuilding. So here we enter into this complex. Haven't seen these design elements before, where you can see how they actually put wood beams in for that horizontal support. Along here are those little notches that would have held probably some kind of wall. So here we get an idea of how it's done. Isn't that interesting? Never seen that before. I think you can detect too that those columns are slightly narrower at the top than they are at the bottom. Very consistent with Greek Acropolis design, for example. And they're benches like we saw before, but here placed in situ. And whether they're original or not, I don't know. But the mix of new and old is fine. It's authentic and yet gives us a taste of what might have been. Pretty capital. Should be Doric, I think, with the scroll, if I'm correct. Like original chairs here, or sitting benches rather, I should say. And the remains of others, which at least give them an idea of the size and of the designs, which they can then recreate. Here's some that are slightly larger. And a killer animal. Just saw a snake and now I get to see a modern dinosaur. Too cool, eh? Attempt at a model. Quite an impressive double building. Looks like a stoa. Don't know. A couple pictures of reliefs of medical procedures in the day. In this picture, the role of the snake as a healing force. The lick of its tongue is depicted more like a bite than a lick. And all of this restoration using old and new, but again, it gives us a sense, a feel for it. Interesting here is how these panels seem to be made over the hollow core mesh, perhaps to reduce weight. Interesting. Maybe a Thorlos or a legislative temple type thing, circular as it is. That would be pretty nice if they build that up again. You get a sense of the length of these two portions of this building. Huh. These pieces are trapezoidal, indicating the circle. They're the same in there. A bit of whimsy. Someone has put a stone up here that kind of looks like either a dog or a sheep. It's probably shut all this down, but here we get an idea of how they go about this reconstruction. That crane operates on that rail and is able to swing all the way around here to bring stone here to be picked up by that crane mechanism, which also moves on an arc, as you can see. It's too bad that it got shut down at the point when they had more pieces ready to go. But it's only stone and metal can be resurrected when the money flows. Again, be an older piece that is having portions of it restored. Even though I saw people down there, I may not be able to get down there, so I will telephoto down, get a look at what I think is the. And I think we can see from here that those stones there are grooved, giving the runners a toe hold on those starting blocks. Too cool, eh? Presumably this whole hillside was covered with benches, as the hillside next to me also. Pretty much an analog of Greece. Whatever was in the process has been shut down. Everything's on hold. Now notice the stadium extends from down there, which may well have had benches on that end also, just like the stadium in Athens, and then continued all the way down here, perhaps to those olive trees. Here was an arched underpass that allowed access by the athletes to the stadium, very much like our football stadiums. And probably they were met with equal uproar when those who were most famous came flying onto the field. There's a pretty green lizard here, if I can get him to show himself again, but he's under that rock, so probably not. All the way around here, a drainage ditch so that water did not flood onto the field or was able to come off of the field. So here we are. Looks like some excavation was done here. Are those starting blocks? Don't think so. I'm guessing this is the starting block here. Two different grooves. Huh. It appeared to have benches very much like the theater, whereas this one doesn't. This one just seems to have dirt. Maybe there were cheap seats and really cheap seats. Once again, it was probably filled all the way to the top edges of these three sides, that end and these two sides, all the way down the hill. This is a replica of a column being made, or at least a drum, but the metal is probably legitimate. The pipe in the center may serve the same function and also allow for conduit or whatever to run through it if necessary. In those holes you see there are drill holes that provide for breaking those chunks out of the quarry. This is interesting. Maybe a device for making column drums, for knowing precisely where each flute must be. Just a guess.